Hi, Dr. P here to talk about something that sounds pretty portentous, the failure of cause and effect. And I think it is kind of portentous in the modern world. So I'm going to talk about the disjunction of cause and effect in games, in other entertainment, and in the world in general. Now, what do I mean by disjunction? Traditionally and logically, a cause is followed by its effect. But so often this connection no longer exists, at least in the minds of many people. You can see this in games that lack player agency. Agency in games means the player's actions make a significant difference in what happens. There is no player agency, for example, in Candyland or Left, Right, Center or other entirely random games such as many drinking games. Games, usually video games, that put the player on rails and force him or her to follow a path lack agency. The player has no choice in practice, or the choices make no difference. In such games we see a long-term disjunction of cause and effect. No matter what the player does, the effect ends up the same. Now, an especially egregious example of this was Mass Effect 3 a few years ago. The Mass Effect series touted how players could make a difference to the outcome. But at the end of the third game, which is the last of the trilogy, all of their choices had made virtually no difference. The ending was the same. Well, the uproar among fans was immense, so immense that developers changed the game. Okay, now let's move away from games. TV and movies these days. They routinely fly in the face of reality in order to get a shocking reveal or some other shocking turn of events. And much of it is nonsense. There's also terrible inconsistency. Something that does one thing one time doesn't another time. But standards of viewing have changed evidently. It's all right that cause and effect no longer works at times. Fantasy rules, not reality, even in real-world stories. I call it cheating and lazy writing, and it's the norm really, not the exception. There are plot holes even in novels. TV and film tends to be dribble, although I have to say I like movies with swords, explosions, or magic spells, and there are a few TV programs I've liked, like Game of Thrones. But I want them to be logical, to make sense. Part of the hoo-ha about the last season of Game of Thrones is that some of it didn't make sense. The film and TV disease now extends to novels. Cheating is rampant, and again, cheating, leaving huge plot holes, constant retconning, having people not react according to what they know, or having people do things that you'd say the character would never do. The writer is manipulating the plot, not letting the plot derive from the characters in the situation. So what happened to reality? Reality no longer intrudes in much of TV and film. Cause and effect are often ignored. And I think this is a symptom of indulgence and wishful thinking, rather than paying attention to reality. The further we get from World War II, the more people ignore history. And they rely on wishful thinking instead of reality. They try to ignore all the ugliness of history except when it suits them, as in the extreme anti-slavery pose, which culminates now in the destruction of statues of people who often were neither slaveholders nor pro-slavery. Not just Confederate generals, but U.S. Grant and Abraham Lincoln. In general, there's a rejection of logic and facts. Stephen Glenn, who's a game designer of considerable note, once tweeted, "Some people are genuinely offended by logic and reason. Furthermore, trying to appeal to those people with logic and reason is akin to throwing water on a grease fire." Now, my reaction is they're fools and idiots. If you don't have logic and reason, you have nothing reliable to depend on. Emotion by its very nature cannot be reliably used to solve problems. Intuition in the long run still depends on reason. In politics and religion, even the President of the United States is a known pathological liar and extreme narcissist. He ignores facts and believes what he wants to believe. Politicians pass bills without thinking about long-term consequences, which are effects. They only think about votes and ideology. Religion is always self-delusion, of course, but today religionists try to force their view of how life should work on everyone. Conspiracy theories run rampant these days. This is a failure to understand causality, a failure to recognize what causes what happens. Yes, people can cause a lot of things to happen, but most of what happens is unintended. For example, the movement of manufacturing jobs away from the U.S. is not a conspiracy. It is not a deliberate plan to tread on the working class. It's a result of historical forces, mainly money. Follow the money. Money talks. It drives a great deal in the world. And when it's cheaper to manufacture offshore owing to cost of living, and then ship to the U.S., companies are going to manufacture offshore. Game companies don't print their games in China because of some conspiracy. They do it because it's cheaper than getting them printed in their own country. People who believe in conspiracies are as much into a religion of belief as Christians or Muslims or other religionists, and just as likely to be wrong. Inveterate conspiracy theorists are ignorant or stupid or both. They have lost track of reality. They have lost track of cause and effect. The belief that everything happens for a reason, rather than understanding that the world is the sum of much chance and randomness, not the sum of some kind of direction by some personified forces, is confused. There are certainly causes, but causes do not need to have reasons attached that humans understand or that derive from conscious human action. So what we collectively have done has made it likely that manufacturing moves overseas, but no one's reason or control are involved in this. There's certainly no overall direction by anyone. Humans aren't that smart. So the failure is ultimately a failure to deal with reality, a failure to seek or even care about truth, a failure to understand how the world works. Reliance on feelings and wishful thinking is the ultimate entitlement. If you behave like that in dangerous situations, you're much more likely to get dead or seriously injured, as in the pandemic, of course, with idiots deciding they're not going to wear masks because they're macho or something. And idiots who ignore the idea that if you gather with a lot of people, you're more likely to get sick. But wishful thinking is easy and comforting in the short run. Thinking is hard, emoting is easy. Narcissism is rampant. Reasonableness has gone out of fashion because so few rely on reason, which depends on logic, reality's fact, and truth, not on feelings and wishful thinking. That's the failure of cause and effect. Thanks for listening.